Good morning, everyone. My name is Walter Petersen, CEO of flanders.bio. Welcome to today's webinar on the use of FAIR data principles in biotech and life science. The webinar is hosted by flanders.bio and brought to you in collaboration with BioLizard, an international leader in data science, bioinformatics, and artificial intelligence solutions for scientific data needs. In the fast-paced world of biotech and life science, scientific research data are the central valuable asset that can lead to breakthroughs in understanding diseases and developing new therapies. Good data management is extremely important, and the FAIR data principles have emerged as a framework for ensuring that such data remains findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Today, you will learn all about FAIR data and on how the framework can improve efficiency, reduce cost, and most importantly, how it can help you getting to the right level of insights from your own data. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce you to our expert speakers from BioLizard. Yves Muijsen is the Chief Operations Officer at BioLizard, a bioengineer and computer scientist from training. Yves is overlooking the BioLizard expert team of bioinformatics scientists, software and data engineers, and project managers. He is joined today by Alexander Koch, team lead bioinformatics and senior bioinformatics scientist at BioLizard. We hope that today's webinar will inspire you to think more deeply about the importance of correct data management in biotech and life science and how you can implement FAIR data principles in your own work. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to an engaging discussion. With that, I'm happy to give the floor to Yves and Alexander for further introductions.
Okay, thank you, Wouter, and welcome to everybody for joining this webinar on data management. It's a pleasure to be here. The agenda for today is here on the slides. So I will do a short introduction of BioLizard. Then I will talk you through a data management framework to make your data fair. And then Alexander will take over with a real-life example. So who are we? Who are we as BioLizard? We build bridges. We build bridges, virtual bridges between biology and computer science. We do that by providing professional services with a focus on discovery and R&D processes in life science organizations. We are unique in that sense that we combine deep biological knowledge with our computer science expertise. With that, we provide state-of-the-art data science solutions with a broad scala of services, ranging from bioinformatics over predictive modeling using AI and machine learning, but also we provide software development services, always in relation to data, of course. And we also provide guidance on data governance, architecture, and infrastructure. We position ourselves as a customer-intimate services company, which means that we provide end-to-end services that are tailored to our customer needs over this whole broad span of services. So how do we build this bridge? We basically have expertise across the whole data value chain. Typically, customers come to us with either a biological question or a data question, or ideally, of course, with a combination of the two. We then guide them through the life cycle of data. So going over data discovery, understanding what type of data is available, data integration, putting it all together, going through advanced analytics, which also includes AI and ML, with the goal to provide scientific insights. In support of that, as I said, we also provide automation and infrastructure advice, and on a more design level, we can give you guidance on data governance and data architecture. So where are we with data in life sciences? I only picked out one number. There is a huge amount of numbers available, but due to the technological innovations, we're sitting on about 250 petabytes of data each year that is generated. And it will continue. So the advancements in experimental automation, in high throughput screening are not stopping. so they continue. That in combination with, I would call it lower cost, probably not low cost for all of those managing data, but lower cost of computational power means that we have a huge opportunity ahead of us. But what does that mean for you as a scientist? It actually means that in many cases, you as a scientist today, you spend almost 80% of your time on selecting data, organizing data, cleaning data, combining different data sets, cleaning again, normalizing again, which in the end, you spend almost only 21%, only 20% on the real science. Now, what is the goal then of fair data management is really to have scientists do more science again. So the data management typically is below the surface. It's something that is less visible, the analytics. It's the sexy part of data science. You can make cool visualizations, provide insights, but there is a huge amount of effort that is needed underneath the surface to make this reproducible, findable, what have you. Before I go further into this, however, I would like to do a quick poll. So the first poll of today, if we can launch that one, is about questioning what is your biggest data challenge today? Is it not having enough data or not having any data at all? Is it about a lack of data strategy, so not really knowing what to do with the data? Or is it maybe low quality of data or a lack of talent? You don't find the people to work with data. Or is it a lack of technology? Please submit your answers now. I see the results popping in. And it seems that still about 46% of the replicants are challenged by a lack of data strategy. And then second comes not having enough data. And on the third place, it's low quality of data. Now, McKinsey did a similar exercise, an investigation spanning 2 years. So in 2020, they did this investigation, and then in 2022 again. And they did see quite a shift. So where in 2020, it was indeed more about lack of data strategy, lack of understanding what you can do with data. We see that in many companies, at least, that is shifting towards challenging the quality of data, having challenges finding the right people to manage the data, and also a lack of adoption of data solutions in production. So we do see a shift in the industry to go from the why should we do this to how should we implement this. And from BioLizard's point of view, we do fully agree that data quality is key. Having good quality of data will increase your data and scientific insights, but data quality is a bit of a tricky thing. And data quality is partially in the eye of the beholder. Depending on what you do or what the goal is of a certain experiment or even the phase at which you are in your research, the quality level that you need for data might be different. Data is also inherently diverse and complex. I think most of you will probably have heard the 3 V's of big data. Volume, we've talked about that. We are sitting on huge amounts of data. But on the other hand, velocity is also very important. So not only the velocity, the speed at which data is generated, but also the speed at which we need to consume data. We cannot sit there and wait for 2 weeks for critical data within an experiment. Next to that, variability is a big challenge, I think. I think we all know that, for example, data that comes out of a certain machine is not by definition the same if a software upgrade is done. So you might even have on that level variable data. On the other hand, if you talk to scientists, they often have difficulties in trying to quantify data. It's a bit of a vague thing sometimes, but in order to make your data fair, you need to be able to define it in more measurable terms. And that can be around consistency, can be around accuracy, timeliness, completeness. So you can, for example, have very accurate data, so very well reflecting reality, but it can miss certain attributes. The completeness is low. Or you can have high quality, high accuracy data, but it just comes in too late, so the timeliness is not up to scale. These are all very important to understand, to quantify, and to measure once you want to start measuring your data. And one other thing to take into account in data quality is that you need to address it as close as possible to the source. I think many data scientists and IT people will agree that we can solve certain quality issues by writing some automated scripts at the end of your process, but missing values, for example, missing attributes, those you will need to fix as close as possible to the source. So as a scientist, it is a goal to have fair data. So what do we mean with fair data? Fair data, on the one hand, means it needs to be findable. So you need to understand where the data sits. You need to also understand what type of data it is. Once that is established, you need to have access to the data. And of course, a lot of regulations exist. So we cannot make all data accessible to everybody. So we need to find the right levels of accessibility depending on the user. Data needs to be interoperable. So not only interoperable between human and machine, but also between different machines, between different processes, even between different business units, for example. And data, we all know data is not cheap. Data is also not a volatile thing. It is something that is an asset. So it provides value over a long lifespan. So it needs to be reusable, independent of the use cases that you use today. So what do we propose? How can you make your data fair? We have a framework that actually sees your data as a product. So that encapsulates a number of areas that you need to tackle. First of all, there is data governance, there is data cataloging, metadata, master data, a large number of areas to tackle. I will go into a little bit more detail in the next slides on each of those areas. But one thing I would like to stress is each of those areas also need to be looked at through the 3 Ps. It's not only technology. In many cases, we still see that there is still the belief that a tool will solve it all. In many cases, in most cases, that does not work. You need to provide the right tools for sure, but you also need to embed it in your business process. And very important, you also need to get the people on board. You need people, definitely scientists. You need to engage them to use the tools and not force them to use the tools and processes that you provide. The good thing is you don't have to do all that work by yourself. Frameworks do exist that can help you implement a structural data management program. I've just listed 2 here. So on the one hand, you have DCAM, and on the other hand, you have DAMA. Just quickly, the difference between the 2 is DCAM is more focused on the why. So it will help you create your strategy. It will help you create your business case, and then also outline a program to implement this. DAMA is much more focused on how to operationally implement this. So on each of the areas, will give you an explanation on what you need to do to make that data management a structured process in your organization. This is also why we focus more on the DAMA framework than the DCAM. So just as an example, this is what DAMA can do for you. For each of the areas, it will give you a definition, a goal, what you need to achieve with that area. What are the inputs, the outputs? What activities do you need to do? Who typically within a bigger organization, who's typically involved in this process? But also, not unimportantly, techniques and tools and metrics. So metrics to measure the success of each of those steps that you take. It's like a book of 570 pages. It's theory, so the theory alone will not help you. You'll have to put that in practice, and this is where we can help you. So for each of these areas, I will now touch upon a couple of key questions, typical questions that are asked within each of those steps. But first of all, another poll. So the question here is, do you have already a structural data governance process in place? And I'll give a little bit of time to see the answers coming. So I see we have a clear split, and the winner is no. About 75% of participants today don't have yet structural data governance in place. So definitely a lot of opportunity here to put this in place. So let me just walk you through each of these areas quickly now. So what is data governance? In data governance, you have to define the why you do things, how you will tackle it, and also it provides ways to measure the success of your data strategy. One important thing to take into account once you start setting it up, that your data strategy is in line with your business strategy, because you have different types of handling data. If you are an R&D startup, then an offensive strategy might be more suited for you. So you just collect all the type of data you have. You don't really care about maintenance today. You don't know all the questions yet that you want to ask in the future, but you want to store that data. On the other hand, if you're more production focused, a defensive strategy might be better suited. Just collect that data that is needed for compliance, for example. It's important to know, because data is not cheap. It does cost a bit of money to maintain. So make clear choices from the start. Same thing with your governance structure. If you are a big company that is with a very centralized way of working, also put your data governance structure in a centralized way. If not, if you work with very separate business units, product units, make sure that the ownership of that data is also within those business units, as low as possible to the level where the data is generated, in fact. Very important, I said it in the beginning, get people on board. So try to define data owners, and typically data owners are those with the budget, making sure that data can be maintained, and data stewards are those maintaining and guarding the day-to-day quality of the data. Use standards policies, pretty obvious one. We can help in giving guidance there. But one thing you might consider is data valuation. As I said, data is not cheap. Make clear choices. The way you could do that is just put a monetary value on the type of data that you have and prioritize in that way. Very important that you think about this in advance. It might save you quite some money later on. So once you know where you want to go, you need to make an inventory. So that is what all what data cataloging is about. And actually, in many cases, it starts with a simple business glossary, especially if you are in an organization that has grown through M&A, merger and acquisitions. Typically, people don't understand the same with, for example, what is an experiment, what is an assay, what type of results do I have. Just making that business glossary can already be a challenging thing. As BioLizard, we have the advantage that we both understand data as well as the scientists, so we can help with that translation. Because we've noticed that R&D and IT in bigger organizations do not typically use the same jargon or talk the same language. Once you have established that, you also need to make a data inventory. You will have data coming out of machines, you will have data coming out of existing processes, experiments, but also project data, sample data, for example, donor data, customer data. All these types of data, they behave differently. Make an inventory, decide which ones are important. And what we do next is then map that data on your business process flow. So you have a certain process flow that you run through. Data is either generated at a certain point, consumed at a certain point, and it's very important that you understand where and how that happens. Once you've done that, you can dive a little bit more into detail on each type of data. And then it is time to define master data. Master data, what we mean with that is that this is that one single representation of a certain data point that corresponds with the truth. The golden record is sometimes called. A simple example can be you've run an experiment, you've run several versions of that experiment. At some point, you want to know the result that represents that experiment and not all the half results or the failed results. Another important aspect is metadata. Metadata is sometimes something that is forgotten, that seems like a bit of overhead in the beginning, but can save you a lot of money in the end. If you have a lot of source data for which you don't like output of machines, which you don't want to use today, make sure that you already attribute some metadata. And metadata can just be where does it come from, who is the owner, what is the quality, what is the version of that data. Because data without metadata is like a black box and often lost in later stages. Reference data also not unimportant to look at. So using existing ontologies, using industry standards. There are a lot of industry standards on data models, ontologies, and taxonomies available. Use them because it will save you time. The data lifecycle as such is also one to take into account. Data is a living thing, in fact. So throughout its life cycle, it will either deteriorate in quality, increase in quality, be relevant or less relevant in your process. So try to get a grasp of that, try to understand that. Next is the overall data architecture. So once you know what kind of data you have, you know how the data behaves, you have to provide some kind of architecture to serve that to your customers. Customers can then be scientists in this case. Then you need to make decisions, and I will not go into detail here, but decisions like, do I make an on-prem solution, a private cloud or public cloud? Can I work on single clouds, only AWS, for example, or do I have solutions that need to be both on Azure and AWS or Google? Important to understand because it might involve costs, hidden costs even. Do I go for a SaaS solution, so a software as a service solution, a solution as a service, or data as a service? These are all concepts that you need to think about. Again, this is not the moment to dive into detail here, but important questions to consider. I would definitely advise, once you start with data, even if you are a small company, start making a conceptual data model. And conceptual data model typically outlines what entities you have and how they relate to each other. An entity in this case can be, what is a project for me? What is an experiment for me? What is a donor? How do they relate to each other? It will not only help you to get a good view on the type of data that you have, it will also be a means to discuss with the different stakeholders in your organization. And again, here, look at industry standards. So we have industry standards like OMOP, Bridge. These are industry standard data models, more in the preclinical phase, I must say. But they can be an inspiration if you want to start developing your own data models. And then you go into the more technical detail. Do I go for data lake, data vaults, or what have you? And only then, and in many cases, organizations start here and work based on the I have a tool that will solve it syndrome. Only then you need to think about which tools you need to implement, which tools fit within your architecture and how they will work together. There are many different vendors out there. Some of them are positioned in a specific area. Some are positioned very broad. You have tools and platforms around data governance specifically. You have a lot of platforms doing data integration. You definitely have a lot of platforms doing dashboarding. But in the end, you want an end-to-end solution that helps you go from data source to a scientific insight now. So we can provide guidance there on either do I want to make such a thing myself? Is my business process so specific that I want to make this? Or is stuff out there available in the market, and can I just buy solutions? What are the typical things that you need to know about those solutions? Are they open? Do they have APIs? Can they talk to each other? And how will they talk to each other? So these are all considerations that you will need to make within your organization. Will be probably a combination between your IT department and your R&D department. But as I said, bringing those two together, this is where our forte is. And then as a result of that, you'll get a handle on your data quality now. And again, if you want to manage your data quality, you need to measure it. So also define KPIs on the data quality, define the targets for those KPIs, and actively manage that. So this seems like a whole bunch of things that you need to do, and it definitely is. But what we always advise is to do this in a quite an iterative way. Thing is that all these areas are interconnected. So we do advise that you start touching each and one area specifically, but start small and then grow as you grow as a company. So with that, I want to touch upon some key takeaways. So first of all, make sure that whenever you define your data strategy, that it is in line with your business strategy. So it needs to make logical sense for the whole organization for it to be successful. Don't see it as a one-off project. It's an iterative process. So make sure that this process gets installed and that it grows as you as a company grow. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are many frameworks out there, many industry standards. Many come from different industries than life sciences, but they are applicable to the life sciences industry. All these data management areas are very much interconnected. So start small, pick one use case, as we will see in our real life example, and prioritize what you do. Again, important, get buy-in from people, not only the leadership, of course, important, but also business and IT, make sure that they work as one team, because otherwise it will fail, your initiative will fail. And try to work with logical domains. And what I mean with that, as an example, just as a theoretical example of how you can implement such a data management plan, data meshes are quite popular these days. What is the concept of a data mesh? Is that you contained domains, and a domain can be a therapeutical area, but it can also be a typical experiment, or it can be a business unit. That's up to you to define. Give a lot of ownership within that domain on how people collect data, how they look at data, how they use data within their processes. But agree that between domains, there is a clear interface on how data is exchanged. And only in that way, you can, as a company, be very successful. If you centralize all your data and it takes a huge amount of time for scientists to get access to the data they need, it will not be successful. But again, to implement such a data mesh, you need some kind of supporting structures. You need a self-serving data platform that allows people to put in data, but also gives a clear view on what kind of data is available. And on the top level, you need good data governance that allows you to define how data is exchanged between domains, what is security policy, what is governance compliance policy. So all very important topics to talk about, and quite some work, I must admit. But as Alexander will explain in the real life example, you can start small and provide already quite some business value going from there. But before I give the word to Alexander, one more poll, and this is the last one. So, do you use machine learning for product innovation? Again, a yes or a no. And so one vote come in so far, and that was a no. just a few more seconds. So we have about 32% that already does use machine learning for product innovation, and the rest not yet. Okay, and with that, I'll give the word to Alexander.
Thank you, Yves. I will present a real-life use case to try and make the maybe slightly theoretical or technical explanation of Yves more tangible. Maybe first of all, I don't know if the slides are still visible because I do not see them anymore. Or should I share my screen?
It seems I was thrown out. You
Okay,
should be able to see them now.
Back in business, yes. Thank you. Maybe I should say try and make it somewhat more tangible because we have a real life use case we can present to you today. But unfortunately, we are not allowed to give too many details. Like, for example, I can't tell you which company exactly it is. But I did want to sketch a bit the context for this particular project, both on the type of company we worked with, but then also on the specific project we did for them. So first, for some context for the company, this was an animal health company, quite a large player in the animal health field, very R&D focused. So they do a lot of internal research and development, focused on biomarker development, for example, for the detection of specific animal diseases. But also they do a lot of therapy development, so drug development, again, for animals. They do animal production optimization stuff, things like that. A lot of the data they have is clinical and phenotypic, but they also do a lot of omics analyses, be it proteomics or transcriptomics, things like that. And it's really quite varied. So it can go from collecting the age of household cats as a type of variable to collecting weather information for specific dates at farms where they collect milk production data. So really quite varied. So that's a bit the context of the company. For the project we did with them, that was on the previous slide, Yves. Yes. So the project we did for them, it was again, they had a whole bunch of data from their own wet labs. So they have a lot of labs where they do experiments and collect data. There's also some field trials they do. They have some farms they collaborate with to test certain things out. These data are generated both internally, but also by external partners, whereby, for example, they would collect blood samples, let's say, send those out to an external partner that does, for example, protein analysis of these blood samples, and then they get the data back. As I said, a large variety of data types. There were a lot of stakeholders involved at various levels. And by that, I mean this project involved people from the wet lab technician who is in the lab day in, day out, to the data scientist that ends up working with the data, the veterinary scientist who has to interpret the results and try to steer their therapy projects, to the higher level management as well. And then on the next slide, the final bit of context is the state of affairs. And that's something that we already derived from the first conversation we had with them. So the first time we sat down with them, these were some of our first immediate insights, is that they were, first of all, strongly focused on innovation. So there was a large desire and drive from within the company to, for example, be more data-driven and to have their biomarker discovery and drug development programs be more machine learning and AI driven. But of course, for that, you need data that not just data in of itself, but data that is machine learning ready, let's say. That's where those FAIR principles are very important. What was also obvious quite immediately was that they didn't really have a proper data governance in place. There was no single data inventory or catalog available, meaning that they had some difficulty answering questions like, what data do you have actually? What are all the different data types that you have? What are things we could do with these data types? And what is there that we could do better with regards to data governance and data cataloging? And then what our approach was at that point, so after this first initial conversation, basically the basic message is that we wanted to try and show them what they could do with their data if it was more fair, which meant that we helped them create this data catalog, for example, which wasn't there yet, a proper data inventory. We wanted to map their data flows. We wanted to give an overview of everybody that is involved with everything from data collection to data processing. During this, we wanted to find out what the data-related pain points were, where, for example, bottlenecks were in the data flow, where things were going wrong or suboptimal. This is all more from the data management side. But in parallel to that, we also wanted to do and that reflects a bit the starting small that Yves mentioned earlier. We wanted to perform a proof of concept analysis, basically collecting a bunch of different data sets. It was for a very specific disease area that they were working on, but we wanted to collect, first identify all data sets they had, of which not everybody within the company was maybe even aware that they had these data available, because you have to realize this is a company with hundreds of researchers and scientists over lots of different research labs and departments. They even have internal incubators, kind of. So there's a lot of people involved, and not everybody is always aware of what everybody else is doing. So we wanted to do this identification of data, collecting the data, and then perform an analysis. It was for a biomarker discovery project, basically showing, hey, look, if all this data would have already been available and would have been fair, so that it would have been easy to find, would have been easy to access, it would not have required a lot of work from us to integrate everything. Here's what we could have done much more quickly and much more painless than what we're doing now. So that was kind of our global approach there. And here I have it again, but visualized with the use of this little graph that Yves showed earlier, whereby I wanted to highlight again those two separate steps. So first on the data discovery and data integration end, that's really the data management part of this project, I should call it, where we help them find out what they were missing, basically, and help them find out where things were going wrong. And then the second part, as I mentioned before, is where we looked into these analytics, which we saw as kind of a proof of concept analysis, highlighting again the value of having proper data governance and data architecture in place. And then on the next slide, I wanted to connect our approach to the data product model that Yves presented earlier. And I'll again split up in these two phases. So Yves talked about all these different aspects of seeing your data as a product. And I wanted to highlight here a bit or explain a bit how we did this in practice. So for things like data architecture, the data catalog, the existing or non-existing data governance they had. Now, how do we approach this practically? Well, Yves mentioned it already before. These data management, it's more than just tooling and platforms. People are really central in this whole thing. And that's what we did. We just made a list of profiles of people we would like to talk to. And then we had interviews with them. We had, I think, maybe 15 people or so we interviewed, again, from the lab technicians to the scientists to the more management positions. So we had personal one-on-one interviews, quite technical at points, to really build this understanding of how they generate data, how does data flow through the R&D department. It includes things like, where do you store your data, and what data management processes are already in place. And as I said, this can be really detailed. So it's really sitting together with the people, sometimes even looking over their shoulder and saying, okay, look, what are you working on right now? Okay, very interesting. How do you collect data from this for this project? Where do you get it? Who do you need to talk to? What do you do with the data? And then even let them show us. So we sit together with them, and then they go, oh, I know I have to ask this person for access to that data portal. And then I know I can click there, copy my data, put it in an Excel sheet, and reformat it in this way, because I know that's what works best with whatever data analytical software we have. And so really in very fine-grained detail, look at how people work with data in that company. And then what was also important in that part, what we built up, and it's mentioned here as well, was this fairness assessment. So throughout these interviews and throughout the second part of our project, which was this proof of concept analysis, we performed a fairness assessment. Already the largest part during this data management part of our project. But then while doing the actual analysis, you still run into things that were not apparent before. Things regarding, for example, data quality, and so we continue to refine this fairness assessment while already doing our proof of concept analysis. So this analysis, just for some context, is they had several types of omics data. They wanted to analyze to find basically patterns in that data that could help them detect disease in a specific animal. And to try and make it, or visualize it a bit and make it a bit more tangible even, when I talk about these data flows and data maps and things like that, we actually made a map for them. So this is a part of an example of what we made for them. And it really details all the sources of data, all the processing data goes through the different infrastructures where data is stored, how they are connected, and things like that. We also then ended up adding the different stakeholders as well, and of people, and how they are related to all the data that's going around in the company. And this is something they did not have before, because I described there were several departments, and people were aware of their little part of this map, but they were not necessarily aware of all the other parts of the map. Which also means that, for example, they are aware of the data they have and the data they're generating, but they're not necessarily aware of other other data types and databases that are created elsewhere, but that might be extremely relevant to the questions they're trying to solve. But they didn't see that because they didn't know about it. And then I also have a visualization of this fairness evaluation. So maybe very briefly, there are different tools available to do this fairness evaluation. There are more automated tools that exist, but we couldn't really apply them here because they require having, for example, a very structured and thorough identification of all your individual data points, for example, through DOI identifiers, which they didn't have. So we went for there are these manual self-assessment tools with fairness indicators, there are several sets of these fairness indicators with which you can score, for example, the findability of data, the accessibility of data. So you basically have a long list of criteria that you then have to mark. And for example, the European Commission, in the context of the Horizon 2020 program, they have developed a set of data fairness criteria. But we combined a few different ones and then kind of averaged the scores to come to something like this, which helped the people or which helped our clients to really grasp also what we're talking about and to identify which of their data infrastructures were actually working quite well and which ones were, for example, the one there in the lower right, were not working well at all. And the example there on the lower right, I can say it was that was actually about people storing data on their personal laptops or even on shared drives, but that were not really shared with everybody, which was one which scored the lowest for obvious reasons on those fairness evaluation. So that's basically what we have been working on, but the project is still ongoing. What's going to happen next? So first of all, we formulated, based on this fairness assessment we did and the overview of their data infrastructure and their current data management, we formulated some recommendations. We tried to make them as actionable and practical as possible. The ultimate goal of these recommendations, but also of the whole project, is to help them extract more value from their data. And they have tons of data, right? It's just difficult to extract that value from them. For example, for their biomarker and therapeutic target discovery projects. So that was the goal we had in mind when formulating these recommendations. One of the recommendations, I won't list them all here, but one of them was about naming things, and especially people from computer science. It's one of the sayings that naming things is extremely hard, one of the two hardest things in computer science. Well, and that's exactly the case here too. Because for your data to be fair, you need to have unique identifiers for every single data point. And they had kind of a system and with which they combined certain attributes of each data point, like for example, time point and everything, into some sort of identifier. But then it turned out that they were not necessarily completely unique. And then everything starts falling apart already, right? Because you cannot follow samples or, for example, throughout different databases if your identifiers are not truly 100% unique. Another recommendation was about the use of data dictionaries or ontologies, about data versioning, for example. There was also a large part of our recommendations on data governance and how they could implement this in their company. It's still a recommendation, right? So it's not we're not writing new laws for them or so. And then what's also going on is this hands-on proof of concept analysis, from which we actually obtained some first results that seem to be quite promising. So we found some promising biomarkers. So putting all this together, the idea is that we provide evidence for the value of these data management efforts, because there will be a lot of effort involved. We do not hide this. There's a lot of work involved in setting this all up. But we attempt to use these analysis to show, hey, look, what took before days or even weeks just for data collection. And this is not an exaggeration. We talked to people and they said, well, I know I need this type of data. Let's say, for example, they need some proteomics data on a set of cows, right? For whatever experiment they're doing. And first of all, people needed to know who to talk to. Like if you didn't know who to ask for this data, then you were already basically lost. Then they had to start emailing around to get it. And it could take days, or even we had situations described to us where it took weeks for people and this is just internal data, right? It's just somebody from a different R&D group within the same company who has it. And it took them 2 weeks just to get access to the data. And the idea is that a fair data repository would cut this down basically to minutes. The time to open your web portal or however you have access to your FAIR data repository, search for the data you have using up-to-date and relevant metadata, and then just download it in whatever format is most useful for you. And that's the end goal, basically, of long-term end goal of this collaboration with that client.
All right. Thank you, Alexander. So yeah, just in summary, so we can help basically with the two things. We can help you make your data more accessible, findable, interoperable, and what have you, but we can also help you with providing those scientific insights that really bring the value of that data to your customer, your leadership team, whatever. Okay, and here we are at the end of the webinar, the end of the presentation. I'm looking in the questions section, but I don't see any questions so far. So maybe an open question from my side. If you have any additional questions you want to ask us, either put it in the question box now, or you can always contact us at BioLizard. I do see a question pop up in the chat. Do you develop the tools or consult on strategy only? I think we do the two. So we always start from the strategy. We start from what is the use case, what is the goal. We do have the capabilities in-house, both on the bioinformatics side, but also on the AI ML side, to develop predictive models on the one hand, but also software solutions that can help you input data, visualize data, all these kind of things. We will always advise, of course, to go for an external vendor if it's not something that is unique to your specific case, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We really want to focus on providing that value. But yes, we do have the solutions part in-house too. Next question I see here. In the given example of the company, who maintains the good data practices at the company after finishing the collaboration? Maybe that's one for Alexander.
Yes. Maybe first of all, still for the previous question, what I didn't touch upon here, but part of our report, let's say, or what we delivered to the client was also a vendor assessment. So knowing what their data needs were and their data architecture needs were, we also provided a comparison of different external vendors that provide exactly solutions for their problems and say, look, these are the advantages and disadvantages and costs of all these different options you have. And then for the maintenance, so the part of our data governance recommendations for this client included exactly a chapter on this maintenance in which we describe how and why they should need to, first of all, provide the necessary internal funding for this maintenance, and then what types of roles they should look into. For example, setting up data stewardship. So you have data stewards who are responsible for maintaining not even just technical platforms or things like that, but maybe even most importantly, this culture of working on data fairness, because it's easy to let it slip, I think, and kind of forget about it, because things have to move forward and might be seen as a break or an unnecessary administration while doing scientific work. So this maintenance is definitely something we focused on in our recommendations to them, that this is an important part of shaking up their data governance approach.
Yeah. In many cases, we also try not to create data stewards or data owners, but to find them. In many cases, there is already somebody who feels responsible, at least, and may it not be official, but who has the best insight in the data and the ownership. It's then providing them the tools and processes to make that official and interchangeable across the company.
Yeah, and they're really vital to the success of such an endeavor. You really need these supporters, basically, right, that are convinced of the usefulness.
So there is another question: how to deal with significant pile of legacy data, which is not fair. Is this rejected or shoehorned or in something else?
Yeah, maybe I can also, it depends a bit. I guess we usually start with, can even be a rough evaluation of cost benefit, basically. Like, how useful could these data sets be for you? How relevant would they be? Basically, are they worth the effort of integrating them with the newer data, let's say? And in some cases, the decision is yes, it will be worth the effort. And then very often it's, there are no secrets. It's very hands-on work, getting your hands dirty. It can take a lot of work. It takes a lot of interaction also with the client, because we really need to understand those data sets as well. I was thinking there are some cases, of course, if it's really, really old legacy data, you might run into issues that basically the person who knew about it or was familiar with it is no longer at the company. And then, of course, it gets even more difficult. Data analytical techniques we can also use to get a sense of the data and try to derive context and information from the data itself directly, instead of from someone who generated them, where we can compare these data sets with the newer data sets and see how we could link them, things like that.
I think maybe we have time for one more. From Charlotte, if you talked about the need for an all-in-one solution tool, or at least a tool that supports different phases, can you give an example of such a tool? I don't believe there is that one tool. There is one process that needs to align, but in many cases, the tools that exist now do have a focus on a certain area. So there are tools that focus, like Colibra, for example, more on the data governance side. You have other tools like a TetraScience or what have you that focus more on the data integration side. Important is that the tools today are often very open with APIs that can be connected to each other. So whenever we make vendor assessments, that's one of the biggest criteria to do. What we can provide as a service on top is that we link those tools together in one overarching process for your company. But that one magic tool, unfortunately, does not exist yet. I don't know, Alexander, if you want to add to that.
No, yeah, I agree. I haven't seen it, but I don't think it's there. It's maybe also useful to remark that, for example, for this fairness assessment analysis, it doesn't provide a solution, right? It gives you a description of what the issues are and what the focus areas should be, but it's not that it will already immediately also give you a solution on how to solve this. And like Yves said, it's usually a combination of tools that are focused on different aspects of the whole data management process.
Yeah. Okay. And I think with that, we are approaching the end of the webinar. I would like to thank everybody again for attending. And again, let's get in touch if you need further details, if you have further questions. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.